Russia is increasing ballistic missile strikes on Kyiv, Odesa, and Frontline cities. Strikes on the capital are happening 2 to 3 times a week, and this is having a very negative impact on the life of the capital and its infrastructure. And the fighting in the Belda fortresses, the enemy has reached the defensive lines near Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Greetings, this is the Operational Duty Officer program from the Spetsnaz editorial team. We analyze events on the front line using open sources and interactive maps. Our guest in the studio today is Dmytro Snihirov, a Ukrainian military analyst. Greetings.
Greetings. Thank you for the invitation.
Russia's preparing large-scale strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure by August 24th. This is according to a report from the Institute for the Study of War. To do this, Moscow may use its stockpile of missiles to destroy energy infrastructure. Given that Kyiv currently lacks interceptor missiles, this report should be taken quite seriously. Ballistic missile strikes on Kyiv, the surrounding region, and Odessa are becoming more frequent and harder for both the population and the infrastructure to handle. The Russians are using 2 to 3 dozen ballistic missiles in practically a single wave, targeting major cities. The recent strikes on the Kyiv region have become perhaps the most terrifying in history. Almost 24 people have died. Warehouses and businesses near Brovary have been destroyed. The occupiers are destroying the economy by targeting sorting warehouses of Rosetka, Epicenter, Novopochta, and other large companies. And for now, there is no countermeasure against ballistic strikes, as there is a shortage of interceptor missiles in the world. The only option is to destroy the launchers on the territory of Russia. Musk currently does not allow the use of Starlink for our drones on the territory of the aggressor country. Meanwhile, North Korea is deploying 6 launchers with 120 missiles on Russian territory in the Voronezh region. Almost 100 North Korean soldiers will be operating the installations. To the total number of missiles with which Russia is killing Ukrainians, these Korean death machines will also be added. The appearance of this unit in Russia will significantly increase the risks for our population, as the number of strikes will rise. And according to Vadim Skibitsky, deputy chief of the main directorate of intelligence of the Ministry of Defense, in July, Russia launched 153 cruise missiles and 198 ballistic missiles. Currently, it is fulfilling its missile production plan at 110% per month. Moscow completed its annual plan for Zircon and Onyx missiles in 8 months. Mr. Dmytro, how can we currently stop ballistics when no interceptor missiles are available anywhere in the world?
It is worth noting that this is a global trend. I mean, the shortage of anti-ballistic missiles. Let me explain. The U.S. military-industrial complex has the capacity to scale up PAC-3 production by only 60 units. For example, the United States transferred the license for PAC-3 production to Japan, the most technologically advanced country. Mitsubishi, a globally renowned company, 70 interceptor missiles per year. That would only be enough for the Ukrainian side to cover one attack by the Russian Federation using ballistic and hypersonic cruise missiles. The main problem is the homing heads. Moreover, this problem concerns both the United States and, accordingly, France and Italy, which are the manufacturers of the SAMP/T anti-aircraft missile systems. This is an actual analog to American anti-aircraft missile systems. But to get to your question, how to fight it? And here it is worth talking about the fact that it's not just about destroying the launchers. In my conviction, we need to focus first and foremost on strikes against legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, namely the manufacturing plants for ballistic, hypersonic, and cruise missiles. Ukraine currently has the capability to scale up strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation to 400 drones per night. To put it in perspective, the Russian Federation has the capacity to respond, that is, to carry out strikes on the territory of Ukraine using only 120 drones. So we have the strategic initiative, but the main thing is we already have the fluorine monophosphide 5 Flamingo. Let me remind you of the tactical and technical specifications, a range of 3,000 and a warhead of 1 ton and 100 kilograms. Accordingly, a so-called star pattern attack, using drones without decoys, fixed-wing drones, and, naturally, Ukrainian cruise missiles against legitimate military targets, specifically manufacturing facilities, would significantly reduce the production level of ballistic missiles. In other words, what are we talking about? Right now, we are asking for anti-ballistic missiles to be provided to us so we can hunt down every single ballistic missile. To put it in perspective, the cost of one anti-ballistic missile is $4 million. According to Skibitsky's information, 150 missiles. To intercept each ballistic missile, we need 2 anti-ballistic missiles. That means we need 300 a month. Unfortunately, there isn't that quantity of anti-ballistic missiles in the stockpiles of European countries, nor in the United States. Let me remind you again, 600 missiles per year. And here the question of strikes on factories arises. We have positive examples, 2 strikes on the Votkinsk plant, a strike on the plant in Kirovsk. The main issue is the destruction not only of industrial capacities, but also, accordingly, of engineering personnel and technical documentation. This is one possible option for reduction. The second, as you rightly noted, is strikes on launch systems, the deployment of Iskanders and S-400s, which are currently modified for strikes on ground targets within 30 minutes. Thanks to the capabilities provided to the United States, namely the processing of satellite imagery in 15 minutes, we have the ability to strike S-400 launch systems and Iskanders in the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea and on the territory of Russia. Recent examples of the destruction of S-400 launch systems by special units of the Main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense in Crimea. Absolutely. Plus, there are positive experiences with destroying Iskanders in the Voronezh and Belgorod regions. The second option? And the third is conducting active operations, that is, neutralizing engineers and managers of defense enterprises on the territory of the Russian Federation. Again, positive experience. Just in the last 2 weeks, 2 managers of Russian Federation defense enterprises who were involved in drone production have been eliminated. Moreover, one of them is the Vampire drones, which, by the way, cause the most trouble for the defense forces of Ukraine. Therefore, in my conviction, these 3 options are the most effective.
The Dobropillia salient is smart. The enemy is trying to find pieces, to bite off pieces with constant offensives on Dobropillia. The largest share of assault operations falls precisely on this section of the front, from the north from Zoloty Kolodiaz to the south in the area of Mirny and Grashina. 3 combined arms armies are operating simultaneously along a 70-kilometer stretch. So we can identify the activity of assault groups in this sector at 3 locations. One of them is, in fact, Sofivka Novomykolaievka. Another is Drozhny Novy Donbass. And the third location is Novolexandrivka Mirny. The most active areas right now are precisely Drozhny Novy Donbass and Mirny Novo Alexandrivka. These 2 segments are the most active ones. The enemy attempted to storm with units of the 51st Combined Arms Army from the direction of Sofiivka towards Novomykolaievka in the direction of Krasny Kut. However, our defense is well established here. The enemy has currently suffered losses and failed to advance, although the gray zone beyond Sofiivka has grown somewhat. After all, the enemy is trying, essentially, like from Shakhd, with such a northeastern wedge to bypass Kucherev Yar and strike our rear. In particular, the recent combat operations involving the enemy's use of heavy military equipment, which hasn't been seen here for a long time, were evidence of this. There were tanks, there was more than a company of soldiers. The Azov fighters repelled the offensive and destroyed the equipment. However, this indicates that the enemy is currently trying to find methods and, let's say, ways to cut off this Dobropillia salient. If you look at the road to Novy Donbass, we can see that there are currently some advances here. And in the area of Novoshake towards Vilny, the gray zone is growing. The enemy is trying to move through Vilny on both sides of the river towards Hanivka to the village of Dobropillia. Actually, right now, this village is, or rather this town and this village of Dobropillia, they are currently key points in the enemy's directions of attack. From occupied Nikonorovka, we see fighting intensifying towards Novodonbass and Suvorove, as well as from the direction of Suvorove towards Belitske. The enemy is transferring additional assault units from Radinske to Belitske. Also, the situation in Radinske itself is quite difficult right now, as more than half of the town is currently in the gray zone. The enemy is trying to crush our defenders from the flanks, already moving, for example, from the west toward Shevchenko and moving along both sides of Rodinsky toward Belitske. The latest, let's say, main forces of the enemy's 2nd Combined Arms Army are currently engaged precisely in the direction of Hryshyn, Novolexandrivka, and Myrne. The enemy is trying to advance with this wedge of the 2nd Combined Arms Army toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. That's one part. The second part, at Novo-Alexandrivka, turns along the road toward the settlement of Dobropillia. Dobropillia village is effectively the key, the gateway to the city of Dobropillia, and the enemy knows this. Therefore, they are trying to move both from the north and from the west in order to encircle these two settlements and simplify their movement, let's say, by occupying this entire territory and creating a general bridgehead, which obviously will be able to move further north to assist the enemy's other main forces. In the south of the Dobropillia salient, which is below the Pokrovsk-Pavlohrad highway, we have the following situation. The enemy is also trying to move towards the Dnipropetrovsk region, specifically from Udachne towards Mazhova and from Kotlaine towards Serhivka, up to the highway, trying to cut it somewhere past Pokrovsk, somewhere near Serhivka itself. So, summarizing the above, we can note that the enemy's capture of Dobropillia will allow them to cover their troop grouping from the flank, which is advancing on Kramatorsk from the south, and to free up resources from this very sector for example, some other subsequent actions. In other words, the enemy's numbers will increase by freeing up their personnel from this direction. We have the opportunity to ask Oleksandr Maturkiny about the situation in the Dobropillia area. He and his team were working in that area. Sashko, greetings. Could you please tell us, what were you able to see? What is the situation in the Dobropillia area? Given.
Hello, Ruswin. Well, in reality, the Dobropillia sector of the front remains one of the areas where the war is raging most intensely. And this is one of those sectors where the Muscovites, at least from time to time, try to use armored vehicles and even tanks in their attacks and assaults. Over the last 2 weeks, there have been at least 2 such attempts by the Muscovites to break through the Ukrainian defense line in the northeastern part of the sector, obviously with the goal of enveloping Dobropillia from the northeast. This is one of the enemy's favorite tactics, creating these enveloping pincers from both flanks. But in both cases, the Muscovites didn't succeed in any of this, not a bit. Our soldiers detected these enemy columns in advance, burned most of the tanks and armored vehicles, and destroyed the majority of the enemy infantry. But this absolutely does not stop. The Muscovite headquarters, the enemy's center troop grouping. Russ's generals stubbornly push forward, numerically small, mostly numerically small, groups of enemy infantry, from time to time supported by motorcycles or buggies, in order to get as close as possible to that very Dobropillia. Hundreds of enemy strike and reconnaissance UAVs try every day to destroy Ukrainian logistics and smash the positions of Ukrainian infantry, our defenders. In this way, they're preparing the conditions for a further assault on Dobropillia.
If they found many spots, pilots, artillery, and so on, they practice all of this so that the pilots can't cover their own guys. They knock out their antennas, so the FPVs can't engage their infantry. Same thing with the artillery, exactly the same. So they're destroying it bit by bit, and then they start the offensive.
The round-the-clock work of Ukrainian drone crews, including the interceptors of the Lubert Brigade, is currently one of those very significant factors that make it possible to significantly reduce the enemy's fire impact and ultimately save the lives of our soldiers. After all, by and large, no more than 10% of enemy UAVs reach their targets. This applies to FPV drones, Gerbera and Shahed drones, and in particular Molniya drones. There was an outright invasion of them at the end of last year and throughout the first half of this year, 2026. But at least recently, the situation here in this sector, at least with the Molnya drones, has changed, if not fundamentally, then significantly. They've started flying less. You can already feel some kind of shortage of drones.
Yeah, a lot. Ever since we started cutting their logistics.
You can really feel it. You can really feel it.
Yeah. Well, look, there used to be 20, 30 Molnya drones per shift, meaning per day or per night. Now it's 5, 10, sometimes 1 or 2. Their drone numbers have really decreased significantly. Right now, the Molnya drones fly a bit more during the day, but at night, it's really very few. Out of 70, 80 Shaheeds that took off, maybe 10 would make it, meaning they were getting hit really hard here.
There are days when just one crew, specifically the Lubart warriors, destroys over 36 enemy aerial targets in a single shift. And there is definitely more than one crew working here. And in every Ukrainian unit, there are interceptor crews. Now just imagine the sheer number of enemy unmanned strike and reconnaissance vehicles that the enemy is using, particularly here in the Dobropillia direction. But I repeat, our soldiers are managing to destroy the lion's share, the absolute majority of enemy assets, including strike assets, at least for now, particularly in the Dobropillia direction. Westland.
Thank you, Sashko. Our correspondent, Alexander Matorny, on the situation in Dobropillia. Mr. Dimitro, could you please tell me, in your opinion, will the priority of the enemy's efforts be at the junctions of the 2nd and 41st Combined Arms Armies? Will the enemy indeed act by simultaneously attacking the Dobropillia direction to the north and the direction of the Dnipropetrovsk region?
Yes. Moreover, the units of the 2nd Combined Arms Army are reinforced by units of the 41st Combined Arms Army. And currently, the main intensification of hostilities is in the direction of the village of Dobropillia. Let me remind you, the distance from the village of Dobropillia to the city of Dobropillia is approximately up to 2 kilometers. So the main task is to try to carry out a so-called flanking maneuver. Moreover, I will note that the 51st Combined Arms Army, here the pace of advancement has significantly slowed down. After the catastrophic losses of the Russian army during the battles for Mirnogorod, the capabilities for conducting simultaneous attacks by both the units of the 51st and, accordingly, the 2nd Combined Arms Armies are significantly reduced. And this is worth knowing. In other words, we can say that right now, this very direction will be the main one in the occupiers' attempts to break through directly to Dobropillia. The task of the 51st Army is to try, once again, to break through directly to the highway. This is the relevant highway to Pavlograd, and this attempt is, once again, the Russian army's established tactic of depriving the Ukrainian defense forces of logistics. But despite all the occupiers' attempts, I'll remind you that fighting in the Dobropillia direction has been going on for about 2 years now. That is Kellen. Moreover, the recent personnel changes, specifically the change of the commander of the Setter Group, are evidence that the Russian dictator fully understands that the possibilities of capturing Dobropillia and resolving, first and foremost, a political issue, since this would allow access to the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region, which is additional, primarily political pressure on Ukraine regarding the alleged possibility of expanding the theater of military operations into territories not included in the Russian Federation, are currently diminished. But I emphasize once again, the main direction of movement here is precisely the possibility of reaching the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. This is not so much a military as it is a political desire of the Russian Federation. And accordingly, another main task in this direction is a strike towards Kramatorsk. So the main thing we will observe in August-September is the occupiers' attempt to simultaneously exert pressure from 3 directions on the Kramatorsk front.
With 5 brigades, an assault corps, and several regiments, the enemy is pushing towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Despite the slow pace of movement, the enemy has managed to achieve success in several sectors of the front. The 3rd Combined Arms Army is pushing from the north, the east, and the south, trying to reach the line of fortresses as quickly as possible. Units of the 3rd Combined Arms Army are moving towards Sloviansk from several directions. One of them is along the Seversky Donets River. If you look at the map, this is the enemy's direction of movement through Kriva Luka towards Starodubovka, with the goal of reaching the Cascade of Lakes in the Mykolaiivka area. The enemy's second direction in this sector is essentially Kalinivka, Rayalexandrivka, Orikhowatka. Here is the direction of the strike. And the third direction is along the E40 highway, the Bakhmut-Sloviansk highway. The enemy's direction is both along the highway towards Malinivka and toward Vasyutinska, towards Tikhonka. So essentially, there is an advance in this area. The enemy is splitting its forces, is trying to create the prerequisites for reaching the outskirts east of Kramatorsk, while the main group is, in fact, pushing further north in the area of Ryo-Alexandrivka, Mykolaiivka, and Kriva Luka. So by conducting constant offensive assault operations, the enemy, with the forces of a motorized rifle brigade, managed to advance in the area of Kriva Luka and Piskanuvka. This is the direction the enemy is trying to reach Starodubovka, after all. That's bad. Why? Because the enemy is trying to push our units off the high ground in the area of Kriva Luka to push them into the Seversky Donets, since we have a water barrier right on our left flank. Obviously, the occupiers are directing their next strikes at Mykolaiivka. Obviously, they won't try to cross these water obstacles here, but will try, in fact, to reach Mykolaiivka, because actually, this is roughly what this belt of fortresses looks like, which the occupiers are striving to reach as quickly as possible. The enemy is moving towards Mykolaiivka with the 123rd Motorized Rifle Brigade from occupied Kalinivka. We can also see the direction of this movement. We can see the enemy's 123rd Motorized Rifle Brigade right there. In this way, the enemy is covering their flank, and these tactical incursions are increasing pressure on our defensive hub right in the Mykolaiivka area. The aggressors trying to break through to it, also operating along the roads, including in the area of Ryo-Alexandrivka and Orikhowatka. So right now, very fierce fighting is ongoing in Ryo-Alexandrivka. The enemy is bypassing Ryo-Alexandrivka from the north and, effectively, from the east. They haven't fully occupied it, although a significant part of Ryo-Alexandrivka is in the gray zone. However, it is worth noting that the distance from, let's say, the southeastern outskirts of Ryo-Alexandrivka to Mykolaiivka to this defensive hub is only 2 kilometers, and from Kriva Luka it is 4 kilometers. The second group of the enemy's 3rd Combined Arms Army is moving along the Bakhmut-Sloviansk highway. We can see that the main directions are concentrated from Privolia through Fedorivka Druha and through Yurkivka. Actually, this Yurkivka, this enemy incursion, just shows how far the enemy managed to advance along this highway and reach the outskirts of Yurkivka. So below the E40 highway, we see enemy movement from Minkiivka to Tikhonivka and into the Vasyutinsky area. The enemy wants to capture Novomarkov. The command of the 3rd Combined Arms Army, while moving in the north and northeast, has actually started moving in the south as well, specifically towards Kramatorsk. So effectively, this army is split up a bit here, and we have what we have. The enemy is currently effectively 8 kilometers from the outskirts of Kramatorsk, and the enemy's assault operations here, right in the Vasyutsinsk area, are intensifying. The enemy is looking for the shortest route, it's worth noting, to reach Ukrainian cities. Currently, the threat to Kramatorsk is very high because the enemy has managed to find certain gaps in our defense and has taken advantage of this, not by throwing all their main efforts at Sloviansk, but by trying, through Kramatorsk, let's say, to reach the outskirts of Kramatorsk, to create such conditions where the enemy will move from Kostiantynivka and from Druzhkivka, effectively cutting our grouping between Druzhkivka and Kramatorsk. It is obvious that the enemy will now be forced to deploy troops towards Kramatorsk and Druzhkivka, as well as reinforce their group of forces, and this affects the number of personnel in reserves. For this, people are needed. And right now, according to experts, The 3rd Combined Arms Army, which is moving towards Sloviansk, well, let's say will be waiting for this reinforcement and is unlikely to slow down its pace of movement because the deadline that Putin set for them is probably autumn and to enter these territories by winter.